What a great pleasure for African Ascent International to bring someone, in my judgment, who is not only a noted philosopher of long standing, but also a committed and devoted clinical psychologist who operates, I think, from the address on which William James lived, very close to Harvard Square. I have been to his shop, and I must say it's quite impressive. Professor George Eastman has numerous accomplishments. It would take a good portion of the introduction to list them, other than simply to say the following characteristic expressions of what he has accomplished. A Ph.D. in philosophy, another Ph.D. in clinical psychology, the second from New York University, and the first from Harvard University. He has taught at the New York State University systems for 12 years, and he also taught musical therapists at Berklee College in Music, in which I met him. During which time we forged a long friendship. In fact, he was one of the colleagues who recommended me for full-time professorship at Berklee College of Music when he was there. He has published at least 60 articles, 4 books in his name. He also found a commune of vegetarians, I think it's called, in which he spent quite a few years. At the moment, he continues to do the clinical, the Buddhist type therapeutic work in Cambridge, close to Harvard Square, as I said earlier. Welcome to African Ascent International for the first time. Well, George, first of all, I miss you. You were my philosopher colleague at Berklee College of Music. After you left, I became very lonesome. I don't have any philosopher to speak to. So I really miss you, George. So it's a pleasure that we connected almost 10 years later, and we have a lot to talk about. So what I thought, given your orientation both as a philosopher, a linguist, a clinical psychologist, it would take several episodes to cover everything that you've done. And so set the stage, George. I thought we should begin discussing your conceptions of human nature. Why don't we begin with that? How do you look at us funny human beings, George?
Yes, well, I agree with the things you said about you're missing me. I mean, that was mutual.
Thank you.
At one point, if you recall, we also shared the same office.
That's right.
And I also remember the honesty with which you would speak up in the faculty meetings, and I always appreciated that. So yes, I miss you as well. But yeah, beginning with human nature, that's a big part of the book that I am readying for publication right now. And the name of the book is The Digital Revolution, Loss of Freedom, of Connection, of Reality, and the Self. And so the book, which is quite a lengthy book, I'm not exactly certain how many pages it will turn out to be, but it is not a small book.
But beautifully written, and it reads flawlessly. A very journalistic writing, very accessible. Even the jargon is limited, and it's a jargon with a purpose. So I enjoyed reading the chapters that you sent me very much.
Well, the book is exploring why it is that in our digital age we are losing things. It doesn't mean that we aren't gaining some things, but what my book is arguing is that, by the way, and I will get into human nature in a moment.
That's quite all right.
But what the book is arguing is that we are essentially losing more than we're gaining, and we're not aware of that. So through a lot of very extensive research in peer-reviewed literature, wide reading. I have, in fact, a separate bookcase that can't even accommodate all the books that I have read in preparation for this. So this has required a long preparation that actually goes way back. So I'm deferring before I mention human nature.
No problem. You're doing very well. I like it.
Some things would be essential. Really, my concern with this issue began way back in 1943. Some people who might be looking at this as 40, how could this guy still be alive? 1943. And I was a junior in college, and I was in what is called the NROTC program, Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps, which meant every summer I had to take a tour of duty. And this junior year tour of duty was aboard a destroyer.
You became a licensed pilot.
Well, that was when I was in the Marine Corps.
In the Marine Corps, okay.
So that's a whole nother story.
Another story.
But which I use in the book as an example of a non-digital world that was involved with the type of airplane, the seat of the pants airplane that I was flying. So I had an assignment on this destroyer to watch over the radar group. There were 6 men whose job during each 4-hour watch to look at their radar screens, which were cathode ray tube screens, which gave a lot of a transmission of a microwave and electrowave radiation. And I noticed that at the end of the watch, usually about 4 of them got up, realized it was the end, and they went topside. They went on deck. 2 of them, always at least 1, and often 2, were not able to get up. It was though they were, in fact, hypnotized. And I had to go to them, tap them on the shoulder, and say, all right, Smith, your watch is finished. You can go topside. And that led me, even at that early stage, and young as I was, to wonder what was the connection between their apparently being hypnotized by looking at these screens, and why did that happen, and was it fairly predictable? So, in terms of thoughts and research for this book, it really goes back very, very far. But let me say something about the concept of human nature that I advance in this book. There have been quite a few books that have talked about what is lost. Sherry Turkle at MIT has a whole series of books written over the course of about 16 years. And she is, being at MIT and being a sociologist, she was very much involved in trying to look at the digital development that was going on there, particularly at the famous digital lab there. She was very interested, and so began writing books and has written a total of 8 books dealing with these kinds of losses that she was just beginning to explore. But and there have been other writers, such as Carr's book, say The Shallows, for example, and I could cite and I do, of course, in my book, probably 20 writers. The difference between those writers and my book, and this is bringing me to the human nature point, is with my background in philosophy
Yes.
and the type of study that I did for my Ph.D. At NYU, I have a fairly wide-ranging number of intellectual interests and skills, which isn't the case with most of those. Sherry Turkle, for example, is primarily concerned from a socio-psychological point of view. So when we talk about human nature, I feel that that's an essential part of explaining how we've gotten into this digital revolution.
Exactly.
And the way that I see myself, I have to tell you, I see you. I see Deborah, everybody in my life. I see my 4 children in this way. I see we humans as, yes, we have evolved, but we still retain certain fundamental and basic evolutionary drives. And these drives, I go into great length.
Yes.
In my book, there is a drive, what I call the discontented drive. Humans are discontented.
Yes.
We are never satisfied.
Continuous desire.
Yeah. We're never satisfied with what we have. So we have an earth right now that we are in the process of ruining. And what do? We go off to find another
planet to plunder,
which we can then ruin.
Exactly.
Unfortunately. So we are eternally dissatisfied. We have a drive, and these are fundamentally inherited, built into our genome. We want to acquire things. We constantly want to acquire things. And of course, capitalism is very happy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a contributing factor. Yes.
We want to accumulate endless stuff. We want to be we want to be competitive. We want to be the first. We want to be ahead. We want to have dominance. So domination is another part of our inherent nature. Now, this view of human nature that I advance, I don't expect everybody to
agree with,
to hold that view, and I accept that others, other readers, other people will have different views, and they're free, and they should be free to have whatever view they want. But my point is to try to show how, with this basic nature that we still continue to express through these drives, there are implications for how we live our life here on Earth. Many of them very negative implications. Just take the development of the car. So that seemed to provide great freedom, great liberation in some sense, and to some extent that was true. It's quite different to be able to hop in one's car and go someplace than to feed one's horses and keep them healthy, and really be responsible for taking good care of them. But look at what has happened with global warming. The main contribution to that happens to be the exhaust from automobiles and airplanes and all of the other vehicles that burn fossil fuels. So, in addition to our having these fundamental drives that are so powerful, and that we are, in a sense, born with, we have two sides as a human being. And I have dubbed these two sides. I've given them a name. And the names are probably somewhat self-explanatory. There's a better angels side.
Correct.
The side of our humanness where we can love and sacrifice and be honest and caring. It's a wonderful part of our humanness, and it is there. But we also have, using Kant's term, our crooked timber side, our side that enables us to torment, torture, which we've done plenty of. And the side that ignores empathy, of which we're capable, but it ignores empathy and leaves us in a place of pretty much constant warfare.
I see.
Pinker has written a book, not his most recent book, but Pinker wrote a book, I think it was the one before this, Steven Pinker, the psychologist at Harvard. And he wrote a book on our better angels. And what he argues is that we're much better off. There's much less warfare. We're killing one another much less.
There has been progress.
Which I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're maintaining our record of savagery, of killing and lack of empathy. Now, that may seem like a very dark view, but what I argue in my book is that we need to acknowledge that we have a nature. We're just not empty shells, and that nature impels us towards certain behavior. And if we want to change that behavior, we have to acknowledge these drives. So there's a lengthy section on religion, and I try to show that the main function of religion, as I personally view it, is that it is a way to help to aid us in our better angels side.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, then feel free to disagree with me. You do agree with Freud and his contention that there is this perpetual war between Thanatos and Eros, or simply the life-affirming instincts and the death instinct. I think you're taking that thesis and arguing that he's essentially right, that the angelic side to our personalities, correct me if I'm wrong, with Chomsky and also Pinker to a greater extent, assert in the case of Chomsky, just like the self has the power to generate words, which is part of transformational grammar. Chomsky also contends that the same self is also endowed with certain moral instincts that make it possible for it to be angel-like, as you say, namely to exercise compassion, empathy, generosity, kindness, so forth and so on, when the self is so moved. But your point is quite well taken. Capitalism is also the accommodating infrastructure on the side that seems to be responding to the desires and is not willing to control desires by what Chomsky is calling the moral instincts and what you're calling the angelic side. Would this be a fair summary?
Yes. Yeah. You got it.
Okay.
You got it. And just sticking with capitalism for a moment. Capitalism as an economic system is much more consistent with these basic drives than socialism. Let's say, in other words, if you want an economic system that is more likely to call out more of our better angel side, And if you look at the Scandinavian countries,
Yes.
if you look at Denmark,
That's right.
it's true they pay a larger percentage of taxes, but there is a communal feeling there.
Absolutely.
There is a commitment to taking care of people.
Yes.
There's a commitment to exercising the better angel side, to exercising empathy, to allowing government to be empathic, rather than just, as is true in the United States, an instrument for the promotion of these very negative, crooked timber aspects. So I'm not using my book to argue for socialism, but if one reads it carefully, you see that there are implications that have to do,
so.
that have to do with our economic system, obviously have to do with our educational system. And the heart of the chapter that I sent you, the last chapter,
Yes.
Chapter 7, was centered around what I call the 3 antidotes,
Yes.
or corrective.
Let's talk about those. I like those a lot.
These drives.
Yes.
And there are 3 of them. And the one is education,
Yes.
and nature, and then values. And I won't get into details. I will hope that when my book is published, people will want to read it carefully.
Correct. Yes.
And really possibly be benefited by it, which is my whole motive in writing this book, is not to make bucks, is not to cause revolution, although I am writing about a revolution.
Of course you are.
About the digital revolution. And maybe, in a sense, for us to really remove ourselves from the effects of the digital revolution, we need another revolution. Certainly, one could draw implications of that kind from my book. But in the one of the things I argue, which I discovered, this is something I discovered in writing the book. What I discovered is that the whole countercultural movement of the 60s, that's actually when the whole field of the computer developed.
I see.
And so out of the ethos, out of those values, and out of the counterculture, flower, child, peace
Yes.
movement, the computer was developing out of that frame of mind. And initially, the initial developers of the computer were very often totally within that framework of thinking. And they saw the computer, and I quote quite a few people in the book. They saw the computer as a way of achieving the freedom and the liberation of the counterculture.
Interesting.
It wasn't a way to make a small group of people enormously wealthy. It was a path to freedom.
To freedom, self-realization, self-expression.
Yes. And I talk a lot about Stuart Brand's The Whole Earth Catalog.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, well, you're too young. but I remember it very distinctly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the first issue came out in 1958, and later on, Jobs gave a commencement address at a major university, where he said that the Whole Earth Catalog was like a book version of Google, only 35 years ahead of its time. Because and there is an appendix of the table of contents of that first issue, and you name it, and it's in there. And the way that Brand describes the Whole Earth Catalog is that it is a book of tools, all of which will aid you to gain your freedom. And the final issue, which was actually in 1975, was actually an electronic issue. But I'll try to paraphrase Brand. He said the very first thing he says, the very first words printed in the Whole Earth Catalog is, "We are as kings, we are supermen, and we ought to admit it, that we have the capacity to do whatever we want to do, and we can free ourselves."
I see.
And this kind of a sense of liberation, of freedom, really drove the counterculture, and also drove a school, which I spend some time talking about, which takes us back to England in 1921, and that is Neil's Summerhill School, which
Yes.
I'm sure you've heard about.
Yes.
And Neil's experiment was one of, I guess, if you could use a name for it, it would be as total liberation of the child as possible. Which itself was based on certain assumptions about human nature. So Neil believed that the child needs, in a sense, to be turned loose to his own devices, that any restrictions or constraints of any kind need to be eliminated.
I see.
And Neil was a Scotsman. He wasn't a curmudgeon who smoked a pipe and smoked cigarettes. And the kids had freedom to smoke a pipe or cigarettes if they wanted to do. In other words, he never accepted that he was free to do things that they were not free to do. So there were no classes. There was absolutely no structure. The kids got there when they wanted to, when their parents brought them. And he believed that children, human beings, have an uncontested right to being free, to be free agents to choose for themselves.
Incredible.
And also free agents to be happy. This is a big point that he stresses. Why are we making children unhappy?
Yes.
He says that's what conventional education does. It makes people unhappy. And of course, I would add, it brings up those aspects of our nature, such as being discontented. The whole educational system breeds discontentment and absence of really coming to know the self. So his third emphasis was the point of education is to provide a place where the child can find out who he or she is. And choose who they are, not trying to meet somebody else's definition or standard of who they should be.
Okay. And now let's change gears somehow. I'm interested to hear more about the relationship between the function of the brain, this biological organism, which by definition is limited, in contrast to the mind, naturally. I speak as a philosopher now, which embodies infinite consciousness, which generates infinite words, which generates infinite possibilities, versus the brain, this recording machine. And I want to explore the relationship between the brain as a recording machine, the absent mind in the background, and all these gadgets that seem to be doing something or the other to the brain. which you discuss with great detail. I would like you to sum up the destruction that is being done to the brain in the context of what we just talked about, this countercultural move that encouraged the self to explore, to realize its possibilities, to disencumber itself from any constraints. A point, as you know, that Marx was very aware of. This is particularly true in the Grundrisse, in which he was worried about the way in which technological advances are going to replace human beings. But his concern, I think, is totally unlike yours, although there is a family resemblance between his concern and yours. His was the question of the unemployment of working people. He was worried about that, that machines will replace human beings. Yours goes much deeper than that. It goes to the heart of the way in which the brain is even becoming more limited because it's going to depend on devices.
Well, thank you. That's a crucial point, and I spend quite a bit of time on that in the book. What you're really talking about is the plasticity or flexibility of the brain.
Yes.
And in my book, this takes us back to the Whorfian hypothesis. Whorf and Sapir, who were European linguists in the 1930s. And what the Whorfian hypothesis says is that the language that we learn structures our brain. And in structuring our brain, it predisposes us to a particular Weltanschauung, a particular way of seeing reality, experiencing reality. So this was before all of the research that has been done through imaging, which is very extensive. And I've gone into that research very, very intensively. So I don't think we have the time to get into full detail, but this is one of the crucial losses here.
Yes.
That because the brains of children particularly are particularly flexible and plastic, they are particularly vulnerable to the effects of radiant light.
I see.
Which is the kind of light that is emitted by almost all of our digital devices, except by two of the readers. Two of the readers they've redesigned so that it's no longer radiant light; it's white light, similar to ambient light. The eye evolved to seeing things ambiently. That means by reflection. Whereas you and I are looking at one another because the light is hitting you, reflecting, and then coming into my eye and onto my retina. In radiant light that's not reflected, that shoots directly on the radiant. And I've made two attempts to contact what is the Center of Eye Research in Rochester, New York, which is called there's a department of the University of Rochester, which I attended as an undergraduate, by the way, that focuses on eye research, and I have the best equipment of that. And I've written to two people there saying, could you consider some research to determine what is the neurophysiological effect of the difference between radiant light entering the retina as opposed to ambient. The one letter I got said, oh, we're not interested in that type of thing, which of course is crucial to find some evidence for that. The other person, it's been 2 months and I haven't heard from them. So we'll see. But at any rate, what has been established from the research that has been done, a lot of it, by the way, by Chinese investigators, interestingly, and is that the radiant light actually reduces neuronal engagement, neuronal interaction. It reduces the richness of the neurons clustering and influencing one another. So that has definitely been established. The influence of young children's brains, that has been established by research. And the main thing I want to focus on, the main detrimental influence, is this: that because the brain, particularly children's brain, are so pliable,
Plastic.
so flexible, what happens is that if from early on you're exposed to algorithmic reasoning, to the logic that guides programs, the brain begins to be shaped to think that way.
Amazing.
And this displaces your idiosyncratic, your own original thinking.
Your creative thinking.
Yes, right. It replaces your capacity to have original thinking with this, I would call homogenized thinking, which characterizes all of the digital devices.
That's incredible.
So, and I have found as a clinical psychologist working particularly with some of my younger early 20s and a couple of adolescents, I found that my experience has been that they're more at home with this algorithmic reasoning.
Now they are with their creativities.
Yeah. And that's why they can buy a computer, buy a device,
Amazing.
and figure out
Immediately.
how to. And when I finally switched to a computer from an electronic typewriter, my brain was an ambient light, analog trained brain. And so I was thinking in terms of my own idiosyncratic logic, my own personal logic. And it won't work. You have to adopt the algorithmic logic of the digital world in order to really feel comfortable and to feel at home in it and to essentially become totally enticed and enchanted, if not hypnotized.
Now, your book, the chapter that you sent me, really stages a Copernican revolution. I don't exaggerate. In a brilliant way, when you give us a critique of the salient distractions of the brain and its inherent capacities to be self-producing, particularly in conjunction with the human mind. But the brain dissociates itself from the mind, although it is really the physical part of the mind. There cannot be a brain without a mind. The brain condition, I think, is dependent on the mental condition and not otherwise. Now, there is a footnote, a long, impressive footnote in chapter 7 that struck me as really brilliant, which is your attempt at using the Eightfold Path to give us a vision of our possibilities in this combat with desire. Because as you know, the great Buddha had always argued that life is a struggle. The cause of this struggle is desire. But desire, the Buddha contends, could be controlled if we practice the components of the Eightfold Path. Right vigilance, right understanding, right contemplation, right conduct, right effort, and so on.
That's right.
So let's talk about that. Your book is very Buddhist in the end. The critique of the digital age is formulated in light of our possibilities to control desire. when we free what he called our creative possibilities.
Yeah.
I hope I did not distort the argument of the book.
Yeah, I have practiced Buddhism for many years. I'm not actively in a Sangha right now, but for about 12 years I was in a Sangha, happened to be located on Beacon Hill. And I also entered Thich Nhat Hanh's order. And he actually gave me a name.
I see.
And which I certainly have not earned, but the name that he gave me in Vietnamese, Chon Nan means true peace among humankind.
I think it's well deserved. That's who you are.
So it would be nice if I could live up to
you are already. There are warnings in the book. But for peace.
Yeah, the point you're raising is absolutely crucial, and you know, I devote a chapter 5 to artificial intelligence.
Yes,
and you notice that term, which was a term coined by a guy named Kelly, who ran a lab at Stanford in the 60s. In fact, Stanford was an amazing place in the 60s because there were two competing labs, both connected with the university. One, Kelly's lab, was patterned after the MIT kind of, exploration of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And the other lab, also connected with the university, wasn't interested in artificial intelligence to replace human intelligence, which is what MIT is focused on, but was much more interested in how do you use computers, AI, to enhance human intelligence. To enhance it, not to replace it,
but to enhance it.
But to enhance it. But you notice the term that's used is artificial intelligence, not artificial mind.
Interesting.
You never find that term.
No.
And that is partly an acknowledgement that there is a difference between mind and brain.
That's excellent.
So the brain, we still do not understand the brain, why it does what it does, and how exactly it does it. For all of our imaging, we do not understand. The brain is, as far as we humans know now, the most complex organ on Earth.
Yes.
Probably not in the universe. I'm sure there may be more complex organs and organisms. But so what is happening is that with these devices, with the onset of the digital revolution, the brain is being altered. Wow. But if the brain is being altered, the mind
is being altered.
Because just like we have kidneys, and kidneys have a function.
Yes.
We have a brain, and it has a function.
Yes.
And for convenience sake, although it doesn't do it justice, we call it mind.
Mind, although it's not.
Yeah, which is also very, very difficult to try to grasp. So yes, you're right about the depth that I go into, and I think that is one thing that distinguishes my book
very much
from these other books. As I said at the start, because of my more eclectic background, the experiences that I've had, some of which may not seem to be directly connected with writing this book, but starting a commune a genuine commune. There was no individual wealth, no individual possessiveness. Starting a commune in Bar Harbor, Maine, and living in it full-time for 2 years and then part-time another year or so. That was discovering things about human nature, that were very important.
No, I wouldn't call your background eclectic. In fact, it is the background that Chomsky is asking for. He wants a philosopher who does science and a scientist who does philosophy. One cannot be a scientist without understanding the philosophical underpinnings. Similarly, one cannot be a philosopher without understanding the advances of science critically. And in your case, you've brought in an extra dimension, what I call the Eastern temperament, which is sensitivity to the literature of the global South, which must be celebrated, which not too many other thinkers do. You do. I'm so grateful that we had this historic conversation, and I want you to look at African Ascent International as your home, to which you could self-invite anytime. There is a theme, a topic that you're working on. I would love to invite you.
Listen, I really meant it when I said that I missed you.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I. And I'm so glad that we reconnected.
And I'd be happy. I mean, there are so many other issues. For instance, can I say?
Of course.
There's so many issues, such as the confusion between what is real and faux or pretend, what is not real. And so I devote part of one chapter to the work of the French thinker Baudrillard, and his book on this whole process by which we confuse the imitation of something with the actual thing. And he also cites a number of other thinkers that also point out that the map is not the territory.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so he's a very important figure in my arguing that one of the reasons there's so much confusion right now about what truth is, what is real and what is unreal, is because there is this general confusion. And I also use the use of like, particularly by younger people.
Yes.
I describe what's called the as if use of
I enjoyed it.
Like it was the biggest mall I ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? It was like it, or was it actually the biggest mall?
I enjoyed it. That was one of the best parts of that's your training in the analytic tradition, the philosophy of mind at work. I enjoyed it tremendously. Yes. Very insightful. I think we're going to do this again and again. When the book comes out, I will do a full-fledged interview on the book and the reviews and so on. And so I must say to my viewers how honored I am to have brought a friend, a mentor whom I fondly interacted with when he spent 20 years at Berklee College of Music, during which time I became very close to him. I miss him dearly, but we have reconnected now, and we're going to continue more work in the future. This has been your host, Teodros Kiros, for African Ascent International.